They say secrets have a way of surfacing. But what if one secret could cost someone their life? When she hit post on her wedding photo, she wasn't sharing a secret, just her happiness. Yet within an hour, her life took a dark and terrifying turn. Her husband, the man she had just married, would rather destroy everything than let the world see his face. Have you ever loved someone so much that you ignored the warning signs? Brushed off every odd detail because you wanted to believe they were perfect? Why would a husband, just 24 hours after saying, "I do," take such a drastic step, over a simple Facebook post? The answer isn't just disturbing, it's shocking. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a warning: trust can be the most dangerous thing you give someone. So before you share your life with the world, ask yourself, what might they be hiding? By the end of this story, you'll understand why that question could save your life. Let's go back to the beginning, where love and lies collided, and the truth came with a deadly price. Welcome to True Crime IQ. She was a woman full of life and warmth. Her laugh could brighten a room, and her Facebook posts told the story of someone who always looked for hope, even in hard times. At 52, Linda Wilson had been through more heartbreak than most. Failed relationships, broken promises, and years of loneliness. But through it all, she never gave up on love. She believed that someday, someone would come along who would make it all worth it. For years, she cheered on her friends as they posted wedding photos and anniversary pictures. She was happy for them, even though she secretly wondered if she'd ever get her chance. Then one day, everything changed. A last-minute trip to Costa Rica, planned on a whim, led her to the man who seemed like the answer to her prayers. She met him by chance, at a small outdoor cafe near the beach. His name was Jack Martin. He was charming, confident, and attentive in a way that made Linda feel like she was the only person in the world. They talked for hours that day, and Linda felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Jack was handsome, with a quiet charisma that drew people in. For the rest of her trip, they were inseparable. They walked along the beach, shared long conversations over dinner, and danced under the stars. It felt like something out of a movie. When it was time to leave, they promised to stay in touch. Daily texts turned into long phone calls, and soon, Linda couldn't imagine her life without him. But as their relationship grew, Linda started to notice things about Jack that didn't quite add up. He didn't talk much about his past, brushing off her questions with vague answers. When she asked about his family, he said he preferred to keep his personal life private. He didn't use social media, calling it toxic and a waste of time. Linda, who loved sharing her life online, thought this was strange. But she convinced herself that it didn't matter. Jack made her happy, and that was what mattered most. Still, there were moments that gave her pause. He didn't like having his picture taken, always saying, "Why not just enjoy the moment?" Sometimes, she'd catch him staring off into the distance, as if he was lost in thought. But when she asked about it, he'd just smile and change the subject. Linda told herself it was nothing. Jack was kind, patient, and made her feel loved in a way she hadn't felt in years. Months later, Jack proposed. It was a quiet moment, just the two of them during a weekend getaway in a small mountain cabin. Under the stars, he asked her to marry him. Linda said yes without hesitation. She was overjoyed, convinced she'd finally found her happy ending. But Jack had one request: he didn't want to share their engagement online. He said their love was private and special, and he didn't want it judged by people who didn't understand. Linda felt a sting of disappointment, but she agreed. She told herself that the most important thing was the love they shared, not the approval of others. The wedding was intimate and beautiful, held at a small chapel in the countryside. Linda's closest friends and family were there to see her walk down the aisle in her flowing white dress. She felt like she was living a dream. Jack's vows were heartfelt, his eyes full of emotion as he promised to love her forever. This story isn't just about love gone wrong. It's a reminder to listen to your instincts, even when your heart says otherwise. Linda believed she had found her soulmate. But she was wrong, and it almost cost her everything. Trust can be dangerous, and sometimes the person you love most is the one you should fear. As the newlyweds stepped out of the chapel, rose petals fluttered in the air, catching the golden light of late afternoon. Linda instinctively reached for her phone, wanting to capture the perfect moment. But before she could unlock it, Jack gently touched her arm. "Let's keep this just for us," he whispered with a soft smile. Linda hesitated but nodded, sliding the phone back into her purse. She told herself it wasn't a big deal. Love is about compromise, right? Their reception was a quiet dinner at a rustic lodge nearby, surrounded by flickering candlelight and the warm chatter of loved ones. They shared heartfelt toasts, a tender first dance, and the kind of laughter that made Linda feel like the luckiest woman in the world. But through it all, Linda couldn't shake the odd feeling of not taking a single photo. When friends asked if she'd post pictures later, she simply smiled and said, maybe. Deep down, though, she knew she wouldn't. Jack didn't like sharing their private life, and she had promised herself she'd respect that. As they drove off to their honeymoon cabin, hand in hand, Linda believed with all her heart that she'd made the right choice. But cracks in their perfect day had already begun to form. Their honeymoon felt like a dream. The cabin was perched on a quiet stretch of beach, where waves rolled softly onto the shore. Mornings smelled of fresh ocean air, and the afternoons were spent lounging in hammocks under swaying palms. Linda woke one morning to find Jack still asleep, the sunlight casting a warm glow on his face. She watched him for a moment, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude. After years of heartbreak, she finally had the life she'd always wanted. She reached for her phone on the bedside table. It wasn't about showing off, she just wanted to share her happiness. Her friends had been there through her hardest times, and now, she wanted them to see her joy. She scrolled through her photos, stopping on one taken by a guest at their wedding. It was perfect, Jack laughing as he held her hand, both of them looking so happy. She smiled and began typing a caption, "Just married Redheart, so thankful for this new chapter." She hit post and set the phone down, already imagining the comments and likes from friends who had cheered her on through so much. An hour later, Jack's phone buzzed. Still groggy, he answered. "Do you know what you've done?" the voice on the other end snapped. Jack frowned, sitting up. "What are you talking about?" "Check her Facebook," the voice hissed. Jack's heart sank as he opened the app. There it was, the photo. The caption. The flood of likes and comments. His jaw clenched as panic set in. He got out of bed quickly, phone in hand. Linda looked up, startled to see the calm, loving man she knew now standing with a storm in his eyes. "What is this?" Jack demanded, holding up his phone. Linda blinked. "It's our wedding photo," she said, confused by his tone. "I just wanted to share it." "I told you not to post anything," he shouted. Her confusion turned to hurt. "It's just a picture, Jack. Why are you so upset?" Jack's fear boiled over into anger. "You don't get it, Linda. This isn't just about us. Take it down." "No," she said firmly, her voice shaking but steady. "This is my life too. I've shared everything else, why can't I share this?" Her words seemed to push him over the edge. He stepped closer, his voice low but trembling. "Delete it. Now." Linda stood her ground, tears forming in her eyes. "Why, Jack? What are you hiding?" He didn't answer. His mind raced, imagining the worst. What if someone had already recognized him? What if his past was about to come crashing down? When Linda reached for her phone again, Jack's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. "Give me the phone," he growled. "Jack, stop," she cried, pulling away. But he didn't let go. In a desperate move, he snatched the phone from her hand. Linda froze, watching as the man she thought she knew turned into a stranger right before her eyes. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "I trusted you." But Jack didn't even look at her. His hands shook as he frantically tried to unlock her phone. "Stop!" Linda screamed, her voice breaking. She lunged for the phone, but he was faster, holding it out of her reach. "Linda, you don't understand," he shouted. "You've ruined everything." In that moment, Linda's world shattered. The man she thought was her future was now a stranger, desperate to hide a truth she didn't yet know. What was supposed to be their dream honeymoon was quickly becoming a nightmare, one Linda might not escape. As he stood there, panic took over. His mind blocked out everything except one desperate thought: make the post disappear. She tried to grab her phone back, but he held on tightly, his face twisted with fear and rage. Their love story shattered in that moment. It wasn't about a picture anymore. It was about hiding a life he had worked so hard to keep in the shadows, a life filled with lies, scams, and victims. Tears filled her eyes, but she stood firm. "No," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I won't unlock it." For a second, he froze, his breath heavy and uneven. The room felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in. His fear twisted into something darker. Rage. Hot and uncontrollable. "You're ruining everything," he yelled, stepping closer, his fists clenched. She stepped back instinctively, trying to put space between them. "Why does this matter so much to you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. But her question went unanswered. He didn't hear her words, only her refusal. His world was unraveling, and in a moment of blind desperation, he lost control. It happened fast. Before she could move, he shoved her. Hard. Time seemed to slow as her eyes widened in shock, her arms flailing to regain balance. The railing behind her was too low. "No," she gasped, a breathless plea as she tipped backward. Her feet slipped, and then, nothing. The sound of her body hitting the stone below was sharp and final. For a brief moment, there was silence. He leaned over the railing, his heart pounding in his ears. She lay motionless on the ground, her head twisted at an unnatural angle. A dark pool of blood spread beneath her. "No, no, no," he whispered, stumbling back. His mind refused to accept what had just happened. On the beach below, a couple rushed toward her. "Call for help," someone yelled. More people gathered, their voices filled with shock and panic. A man knelt beside her, searching for a pulse. His face fell, and he shook his head. She was gone. Upstairs, he sat slumped in a chair, staring blankly at the floor. When the police arrived, he barely looked up. "It was an accident," he mumbled, his voice hollow. "I didn't mean for this to happen." The officers exchanged a glance before one stepped forward. "Sir, we're going to need you to stand up." He shook his head, his hands trembling. "You don't understand. We were arguing, it got out of hand." "Stand up," the officer repeated, firmer this time. Slowly, he rose, his knees buckling under the weight of what he'd done. The investigation quickly uncovered the truth. He wasn't just a grieving husband. He was a con artist, a man who had spent years preying on older, financially secure women. His charming smile and heartfelt words were tools to gain their trust before he drained their bank accounts and disappeared. Vacation resorts were his hunting ground. He arrived alone but always left with someone new, someone who believed his promises of love and a future together. His aversion to social media wasn't about privacy, it was about keeping his victims from finding each other. He was a ghost, leaving no trail behind. But the Facebook post changed everything. For the first time, his face was tied to a name. His carefully constructed world began to crumble. As detectives dug deeper, they found phone records, financial transactions, and testimonies from past victims. Each story followed the same pattern: meet at a resort, fall in love, and lose everything. Some women were left bankrupt. Others barely recovered. "He told me I was his soulmate," one victim said, her voice trembling. "I believed him until he vanished with everything I had." Another woman admitted she almost reported him but felt too ashamed. "I didn't want anyone to know I'd been fooled," she said. Piece by piece, the investigators built their case. This time, he hadn't disappeared fast enough. In court, the evidence was overwhelming. The prosecutor described him as a predator, a man who used love as a weapon to manipulate and exploit. The Facebook post, the one he had feared so much, was the key to exposing his lies. The defense argued that her death was a tragic accident, the result of a heated argument gone wrong. But the jury wasn't convinced. The victim's family shared their grief during impact statements. "She believed in love, even after everything she'd been through," her sister said, holding back tears. "And he took that from her." Her brother added, "We trusted him because she trusted him. And he destroyed her." The room was silent as the judge delivered the sentence: life in prison without parole. For her family, the verdict brought some closure, but it couldn't bring her back. Her death was a reminder of how fragile trust can be, and how dangerous it is when placed in the wrong hands. Her sister became an advocate, speaking out about emotional abuse and manipulation. Her brother supported organizations that help victims of scams and exploitation. Together, they turned their grief into action. This story is a tragic reminder of the devastating impact of lies and betrayal. One post meant to celebrate love became the spark that exposed a web of deception, and cost a woman her life. As we reflect on this, we must ask ourselves, how well do we really know the people we trust? What kind of person are you? Do you support crime, or do you feel for the victim, an innocent woman whose only mistake was trusting someone who didn't deserve it? If you don't support crime, if you felt for her and believe in justice, hit the subscribe button now. Join us as we continue to uncover stories of deception, betrayal, and the relentless pursuit of truth. Your support helps us share these important stories, remind the world of the consequences of wrongdoing, and honor those who can no longer speak for themselves. So, what's your choice? Subscribe now and stand against crime.